will help to develop your skills in using the different verb tenses in English. So this video is a brief introduction to different types of verbs and some of the verb tenses that we'll be using throughout the term. This video is optional, and it's designed to give you a basic overview of the terms or the terminology that your instructor may use as you move through the different chapters. The objective or the goal of this video is to help you better understand action versus non-action verbs, main verbs versus helper verbs, and verb tenses, the way that they can tell us more about time. If you feel very comfortable with these topics, feel free to skip this video. Otherwise, let's continue. Okay, let's review what we've learned so far after the first video on sentence structure. So we learned that every sentence needs a subject and a verb. We learned it also needs meaning. We learned that some verbs need an object and that some verbs do not. To review, we learned that verbs tell us about the subject of the sentence, tells us more. Some verbs express what the subject is doing, so some verbs express the action that the subject is doing. But verbs can also tell us about the state of the subject or provide more information about the subject. We'll get into this as we move through the slides. Okay, so verb tenses. The verb tenses that we'll study this term will be very useful because verb tenses connect the action or the verb to a time orientation. The three main verb tenses, we usually talk about present time situations, past time, and future tenses. Let's take a look at what this will look like for the term. So you can see here on this chart some color codes. Let's look at the bottom of the chart first. So chapter 1 in yellow is focused on the present verb tenses. And so we will first study the simple present form and then present progressive form. Chapter 2 focuses on past verb tenses. So we'll look at the simple past and then we'll look at past progressive form. Chapter 3, we will move to the future verb tenses, looking at the simple future form and also the progressive form in the future. Okay, progressive or continuous, so actions that are continued. Chapter 4, in the olive green color, chapter 4 is about the perfect verb tenses. They're a bit more complicated. We'll also look at forming questions in chapter 5. Okay, let's take a closer look at verbs, different types of verbs. So first, we have action verbs versus non-action verbs. And a good way to compare the difference is when you read the sentence, can you picture the action? So can you picture the subject of the sentence doing something? Let's take a look. So action verbs versus express actions. So let's look at the first sentence. Amal walked slowly today. Can you picture the action? She ate her breakfast slowly too. Can you picture the action? Okay, let's look at transitive verbs versus intransitive verbs. Don't worry if you haven't heard this terminology before. You will not be tested on these words, these terms. Again, it's just to help you understand your textbook or your instructor's explanations. So, transitive and intransitive verbs really ask the question, does the verb need an object? Let's take a look. Does the verb need an object? Amal walked slowly today. She ate her breakfast slowly too. Go ahead, answer the questions, and when you're ready, come back to the video. The first one, Amal walked slowly today. We learned that objects are affected by or influenced by the verb, and they usually come straight after it. So is there an object here? Amal walked slowly today? No, there's no object. So the verb walked does not need an object. Let's look at the second sentence. She ate her breakfast. Does the verb ate or eat, does it need an object? She ate what? She ate her breakfast. So ate is an example of a verb that needs an object. So again, some verbs need an object. We call these verbs transitive verbs. So again, you don't need to know the terminology, just be aware that some verbs need an object and some verbs don't. So when you're completing the exercise or you're writing your own sentences, it'll help for your sentence format. You'll learn a lot more about this in your writing class. So for now, in the sentences below, identify the verb and the object. Pause the video, come back when you're ready. Okay, the verb is marked in blue, and the object is marked in gray. So the puppy likes what? The ball. He is chewing what? He is chewing it. So you can see the pronoun is the object. Okay, the object, the ball, and it. So again, just to review, we have the subject, the verb, and this verb needs an object. Subject, verb, and this verb needs an object for meaning. Okay, next, non-action verbs. So non-action verbs, if you try to picture an action taking place, you won't see one. Non-action verbs, they provide information about the subject. So they might describe a quality of the subject or give us information about where the subject is. Let's take a look at the examples. So the first one, the course is interesting and the teacher is nice. So you can see the information is an adjective. It's the writer's opinion. The next one, Mona was a student at Prince Nora University. We can see that that information is telling us what Mona was before. Now, Mona is a student at Casau, for example. Okay, let's look at the last one. My sister is not here. She is at work. What information are we getting here? We're getting information about location. So again, non-action verbs give us information about the subject, and you can see the different kinds of information. Okay, the be verb. The be verb is a very common non-action verb. It provides a lot of information. So let's take a look again at the first sentence. The course is interesting. There's our be verb. Let's look at the second one. Mona was a student at King Saud University. How many verbs can you see in each sentence? Only one, right? In this case, the be verb, it's our only verb. It's our main verb. Okay, so when there's one verb, it's the main verb. We make some verb tenses by using only one main verb. But sometimes the be verb is the helper verb. It helps the main verb and we need both to form the verb tense. So let's take a look at the sentences. The first one, we are studying. The be verb in blue is helping the main verb in green. The children were playing. The be verb in blue is helping the main verb. So the be verb, we call it the helper verb. It's also called the auxiliary verb. The auxiliary verb. These mean the same, the helper verb or the auxiliary verb. And the point is that some verb tenses require or they need a helper verb plus a main verb to form the verb tense. So you'll hear your teacher use these words. Okay, there are other auxiliary verbs or there are other helper verbs. It's not only the be verb. So, why? Because auxiliary verbs or helper verbs help form various verb tenses. They form negative statements and questions. And what's the point here? The main point is the helper verb will always need a main verb. Let's look at the 4 examples. We won't talk about what verb tenses they are for now, but just notice that the helper verb is in blue and the main verb is in green. Okay? Helper verb and main verb. Okay, in this conversation, students are trying to find their name on a course that they registered for. So try to imagine them having this conversation, talking to each other. Okay, let's start. Amal has found her name on the list. I didn't find my name on the list. Did Nora find her name? Maybe we are not registered in the course. Okay, if we take a look at that conversation, we can see how helper verbs and main verbs help us to form different sentences in English. That's all you need to know for now, okay? So to review what we've done so far, we've said that there are action verbs and that there are non-action verbs, and that there are main verbs in some verb tenses, and that some verb tenses are formed by using a helper verb and a main verb. Okay, let's continue. Okay, let's look at verbs in the past tense. This will be in Chapter 2. Okay, so just so you know now, Chapter 2, verb tenses, your instructor will use 2 types of, Chapter 2, simple past verbs require you to do some extra studying. And the reason is because some verbs are regular verbs. That means they follow the grammar rules that you'll learn about in your book in terms of spelling. But irregular verbs, these verbs are not regular. They don't follow the rules. So their past tense forms have special spellings. Your book will provide a list, and you'll have to study those on your own. So you'll hear those words come up, okay? Regular verbs versus irregular verbs. Okay, that's all for now. So let's check your understanding so far. So can you explain the difference between an action verb and a non-action verb? Can you explain that some verbs need an object, but that some verbs don't need an object? And that some verb tenses are formed with just a main verb, and that some verb tenses require a helper verb plus a main verb. Okay, if you can basically understand those, that's great. You'll learn much more about it as we follow through with each chapter. Okay, thanks for watching.